from Brokaw.
Good evening. A dark day for America. John F. Kennedy Jr., his wife Carolyn, and her sister Lauren Bessette still are missing tonight. And it does now seem certain that they went down in the crash of a single-engine plane that Kennedy was flying last night to Martha's Vineyard off Massachusetts. As that news spread across America throughout the day, there was a common reaction. This is unbelievable. That family truly is cursed. John Jr., we first knew him as John, grew into a strikingly handsome young man with a stylish and beautiful wife and a determination to live life on his terms. Well, he carried the aura of his famous name and parentage. He took off from a New Jersey airport last night, heading eventually for his cousin Rory's wedding at the family compound in Hyannisport after stopping first in Martha's Vineyard. John Kennedy Jr. had his pilot's license for about a year. We're going to begin tonight with NBC's Robert Hager, who first heard about all of this early this morning. Robert?
Grim story, Tom, and grimmest of all, two compelling pieces of information. First, radar blips that could have been the Kennedy plane suddenly disappeared at just the time and place that plane might have been as it approached Martha's Vineyard last night. Second, what sadly is now being pulled from the surface of the sea. Among bits of wreckage found in choppy water off Martha's Vineyard this afternoon, a piece of luggage with Lauren Bessette's name on a tag. A headrest, a tire, only small pieces. John Kennedy Jr. had his pilot's license only 14 months. In these pictures, he's seen taxiing last November in the plane he owned then, but this is the one he flew last night, a much more powerful, complex six-passenger Piper Saratoga, acquired only recently. It was 8:39 p.m. when he took off from the small airport in New Jersey. Private pilot Kyle Bailey watches from the ground.
I saw what kind of night last night was, and, I actually, when I got home, I said, to my family, I said, somebody's probably going to kill himself in the airplane. I hate to say it, but, just taking off in that, with that low visibility over, if he was going over land, that would be fine, but over the water, over the ocean at night in a single-engine airplane, I myself, unless conditions are perfect and you're extremely high, I myself wouldn't have done it.
A little more than an hour later, when the Kennedy plane fails to show up at the Martha's Vineyard airport, relatives call the Coast Guard. 2 a.m. off Long Island, authorities believe they hear the sound of an emergency locator beacon might be coming from a downed plane. Boats launch, but the noise is never heard again. Authorities decide it's a false lead. Daybreak now, and search planes take to the air. And now air traffic controllers find evidence of an unidentified radar blip that disappeared during the night at 9:39 p.m. That last radar hit was about here, 17 miles off Martha's Vineyard, near Gay Head. At a point where John Kennedy's plane would have been descending into thick, heavy haze and preparing to turn either left or right to set up for the approach to runway 24 from this direction, dictated by prevailing winds. In the thick haze and the turn, could Kennedy have become confused? Private pilot John Shelton, who's flown a Piper Saratoga like the Kennedy plane.
That the pilot could get vertigo, and not know which way is up or down, or you could get confused as to what way is up or down.
Flight instructor Marcus Buttercoffer.
In a case like this, you got to rely and believe what the flight instruments tell you and act on, meaning basically fly the airplane and act on what the instruments tell you.
And this afternoon, the grim finds wreckage washed to within 200 yards of shore off Gay Head. An eyewitness to one find, Chris Urbetta.
As it came in, we noticed that it was a piece of luggage, and a friend of mine who we were with pulled it in, and we lifted up a little Velcro name tag, and it turned out to be Lauren Bessette.
Lauren Bessette, Kennedy's sister-in-law, aboard the plane with Kennedy and Kennedy's wife, Carolyn, as it went down, or as it's presumed to have gone down. Tonight, authorities say they'll continue to search intensely for days, if need be. The water in that area is actually fairly shallow, just 200 to 100 feet deep, and ships are headed into the area now, equipped with underwater sonar. Those are sound waves that can be used to locate wreckage at the bottom. Tom?
Thank you, Robert. And Bob, by the way, there's more debris, I gather, that is coming ashore at Gay Head. They've cordoned off that beach, including a strut with a wheel on it and other pieces of an airplane. So they probably will have a pretty good idea before too long, don't you think?
A pretty good idea. I mean, well, the name tag kind of does it. This indeed was the plane. So now what you need to determine is more about just where it went down, and can you find more of the wreckage underwater, if that's where it is, and can that tell you anything about what caused this crash?
Thank you very much, Robert Hager. And live over the crash site right now as the collection of debris continues, let's go to NBC's Kerry Sanders. Kerry, what are you seeing there? All right, you're looking at pictures of Coast Guard vessels that have been working a grid not too far offshore of Gayhead. That's the western end of Martha's Vineyard. Originally, they had a 1,000 square mile area that they were working, but once the debris began to wash ashore, then they concentrated on an area that was just about 12 miles off the western end of Martha's Vineyard. Ironically, it is that exclusive neighborhood in which Jackie Kennedy once had a large family compound. She was there as part of a large parcel of land that had been assembled by Defense Secretary Robert McNamara, who served in the Kennedy administration, obviously. So as you can see in the late summer night, and in the late summer light, those boats and helicopters overhead, the Coast Guard, Civil Air Patrol, and the Air Force are involved in the search for debris. The first significant piece of debris, that piece of luggage with a name tag attached to it, was picked up by some young people who were on the beach. They handed it off to police, who came along in an all-terrain vehicle. And on that all-terrain vehicle, they had other pieces of an airplane, quite plainly. It was them that they cordoned off the beach. NBC's Dr. Bob Arnott, who is also a private pilot, was in that same flight pattern last night. He was going from the eastern shore to Nantucket, the island that is just east of Martha's Vineyard. Bob Arnott tells us now what he saw when he flew past Hyannisport, if he saw anything at all. Bob?
Tom, last night, the real problem was coming out of New York City. There was about an hour delay, which would have been a daytime flight, a nighttime flight for him. What I noticed was that leaving that New Jersey area, it's a beautiful night, much as like you see right now, beautiful sunset. But once the sun went down, you had this murky sort of black ink, making it very difficult to see. Now, I confirmed with the FAA about an hour ago that they actually were warning pilots as of about 9 or 9:30 last night that the dew point, that is the temperature dew point spread, which should be wide, was down to 21 or 22 degrees, meaning it was right on the brink of fog. But the delimiter here is what we call the slant distance. When you look down from the airplane like that, it was very difficult to see. And to answer your question, Tom, when I looked down at Martha's Vineyard, I could not see it from about 5 miles away. When I went to land at Nantucket, ordinarily you like to have a horizon to be able to see where your wings are and be able to figure out whether you're flying straight and level or not. I had to go to complete instruments to be able to keep my plane upright. With just 100 hours and no instrument license, it would have made it pretty difficult, added a significant degree of difficulty for him to handle a problem in that black murk that was out there last night, Tom.
Dr. Bob Arnott, thank you very much. Well, that was the situation for young John Kennedy, who had his pilot's license for just about a year, and this was a new airplane for him. We've come to know him so well. There never was a moment in John Kennedy Jr.'s life in which he wasn't famous, the object of attention, affection, adulation, criticism. He laughed off the attempts to elevate his status, but in fact, he was as close to royalty as this country had. NBC's Rick Davis tonight on the storied life of John F. Kennedy Jr.
He was a child born to fame, a part of the most photographed family in the world. Images he once recalled.
My family photo album in my head is shared by a lot of people. So it's an unusual sort of connection to have with other folk.
One image is carved into our collective memory, this salute at the funeral of his father. It was John F. Kennedy Jr.'s 3rd birthday. In the years that followed, Jacqueline Kennedy shielded John and his sister Caroline, worried about their privacy and security. John F. Kennedy Jr. graduated from Brown University and in 1989 earned a law degree from New York University. He was briefly an assistant district attorney in Manhattan. In 1994, he told the nation of another Kennedy loss.
Last night at around 10:15, my mother passed on. She was surrounded by her friends and her family and her books.
And again, the nation joined the Kennedy family in mourning. In 1995, John F. Kennedy Jr. found a role friends say he had long searched for, he began a magazine called George, and he showed the Kennedy self-deprecating sense of humor.
I don't think that I've seen as many of you in one place since they announced the results of my first bar exam, so...
Kennedy failed that exam, and the man who had treasured his privacy went public to sell his magazine.
I understand that I compromise a measure of my own privacy by doing something like this.
He did it with enthusiasm.
What the hell is this?
It's a copy of George. It's the new political magazine I'm editing. I had the art department mock up a cover with you on it. It's pretty great, huh?
In 1996, another big change for the man People magazine called the most eligible bachelor. John F. Kennedy Jr. married Carolyn Bessette on an island off the Georgia coast. They said they met jogging in Central Park. She grew up in affluent Greenwich, Connecticut. Her sister Lauren was aboard the plane. Carolyn Bessette Kennedy graduated from Boston University with a degree in education and worked in the fashion industry in New York. Tonight, in a special edition of the Chicago Sun-Times, the story of their courtship and the search is told. Rick Davis, NBC News, New York.
Someone who knew John Kennedy well is Walter Isaacson, who's the managing editor of Time magazine. And we have been commenting here all day long, Walter, that for all the burdens of his namesake, his great wealth, the fact that he was so good looking and he got so much adulation, John F. Kennedy Jr. managed to keep both feet on the ground.
He was incredibly well grounded and self-aware, and he had a good sense of humor about the type of fame and responsibility he had to wear. He never tried to act like he was just an ordinary guy, but he could convey that simply by understanding who he was and not being so full of himself. He had, he was so good looking, people thought he was kind of dim-witted or something, but boy, he had a lot of common sense and a real sense of himself. Very solid guy.
As journalists and as American citizens, we'll be dealing with the Kennedy family well into the 21st century.
Absolutely. I mean, for 70 years in some ways, we've been watching this family, and it seems surreal at times, very sad at times, too. The amazing depth of the tragedy. One of the things that they stand for, and I know you've been saying it all day, is the notion that it's important to be in the public arena, to be involved in public service. He very much felt that his magazine, George, was a way of exalting, yet again, the joy of politics. He used to talk about his father as having such a spirit for politics, and he wanted to recapture that in the magazine. It was his way of doing public service.
And Walter, you're over there at Time Life. It was that memorable photo on the cover of Life magazine, obviously, that captured the hearts of everyone. That is the enduring image of John F. Kennedy Jr. Will we see that in your magazine again next week?
Yeah, you certainly will. We're doing a special issue, of course. It's sad to be doing it, but we're trying to put it both in the context and to say all we knew about this guy, his family, and what it means for America. So we've got all the pictures going in and a lot of writing, and people like Professor Schlesinger, others writing for us about it.
Thank you very much, Walter Isaacson, managing the editor of Time magazine and John F. Kennedy Jr.'s friend. Our coverage will continue in just a moment. As we continue our coverage now on John F. Kennedy's missing plane, which is now presumed to have crashed in the waters off Martha's Vineyard, carrying John F. Kennedy and his wife Carolyn and her sister Lauren to what now seems to be a certain fate of death. We should tell you as well, at the Kennedy compound in Hyannisport tonight, they have postponed the wedding of his cousin Rory. That was his ultimate destination. She's the youngest daughter of Ethel Kennedy and the late Robert F. Kennedy. The whole family was gathered there. It was late last night or early this morning that they first realized that his plane was missing. And then today there was a small family mass on the porch of Ethel Kennedy's home in the Kennedy compound. And as I say, the wedding has been postponed indefinitely. The number of small planes being piloted and the number of accidents are growing in this country. NBC's Pat Dawson has been looking at the numbers, and he joins us tonight from West Hampton Airport, which is another popular resort destination on Long Island. Pat?
Tom, what happened to John Kennedy was hardly unique. Yesterday, across America, there were 11 other accidents involving private pilots, and among private pilots, it is human error that is most often the cause of crashes.
Each day, thousands of flyers across America take off looking for the thrill of flight. The vast majority return safely, but not everyone. In June, this plane crashed on the runway at a small airport in New Mexico. While the number of accidents isn't large, private pilots, especially those who fly just for recreation, get into trouble far more often than their commercial counterparts. Jack Schultz has 5,000 hours in the air.
You don't have much time, so you have to know what you're going to do or have a plan before you start making decisions.
And some pilots don't always get that part of flight planning done. This month, 4 died when this single-engine plane crashed in Utah. A few days earlier, the pilot of this plane was killed in a crash near Seattle. In 1998, the NTSB reports there were 1,907 accidents involving non-commercial aircraft. 361 were fatal crashes. And pilot error is the most common cause. Michael Smart runs a flight school in Islip, New York.
Judgment and making good decisions is something that you can't teach.
And there are few opportunities for the FAA to learn about private pilots whose judgment isn't good. Federal regulations require only a biannual flight review, a test of mostly basic flight skills. Flight instructors will tell you most pilots are careful and cautious. They will also tell you that one error in judgment can be fatal. Tom?
Thank you very much. Pat Dawson tonight on general aviation in this country. Inexperienced pilots, light airplanes, difficult conditions. That seemed to be a prescription last night that did not turn out well at all for John F. Kennedy Jr., his wife, and her sister. As they headed for Martha's Vineyard, they have not been seen now in almost 24 hours. We'll be back with the view from the White House in a moment. Go to the White House now. NBC's John Palmer, who's been standing by all day as President Clinton keeps track of the disappearance of John F. Kennedy Jr. and his wife. John?
Tom, the president received word the Kennedy plane was missing shortly after 7 o'clock this morning. Since then, the White House has been helping coordinate the search effort between the Coast Guard and other government agencies. The president, who has appeared with John F. Kennedy Jr. on several occasions in recent years to promote a variety of social issues and causes, today directed the federal government to lend all possible assistance in the search effort for his missing plane. Aides say Mr. Clinton first called Housing Secretary Andrew Cuomo, who is married to Carrie Kennedy, daughter of the late Senator Robert Kennedy, to express his concern. Later calls were placed by the president to Senator Ted Kennedy and to John F. Kennedy Jr.'s sister, Caroline Schlossberg. Many of the tourists who gathered outside the gates of the White House today expressed shock at news that the plane was missing.
It's a kind of Greek tragedy with the family. You know, you've seen so many of them die, and we've all experienced that. And here's another one, so incredibly young.
He had his own niche. He established the magazine to become his own man, and that was pretty commendable because he wasn't trying to live off of his family fortune. It is a shame what happened.
I think people have a lot of empathy for a family that seems to be so blessed and yet so cursed by fame and fortune and celebrity.
At Arlington National Cemetery, a bouquet of flowers with the words "Praying for John Jr." was left today at President Kennedy's gravesite near the eternal flame. Here, too, people expressed concern and disbelief.
It's very upsetting. Yeah. I can still remember where I was when John Kennedy was killed, and it just doesn't seem fair.
All across the nation and throughout much of the world, people followed the search efforts any way they could. Near the Kennedy compound on Cape Cod, an expression of hope, a yellow ribbon placed around a telephone pole. President Clinton is not expected to have any public comment until sometime tomorrow. Tom?
Thank you, John. I'll be back with some final coverage in a moment. NBC's Rahima Ellis tonight is at the Kennedy family compound in Hyannisport.
Tragedy has haunted the Kennedy clan for generations. In 1944, Navy pilot Joseph Jr., the eldest son of Joe and Rose Kennedy, was killed in a plane crash during World War II. He was 29 years old. 4 years later, his sister Kathleen was also killed in a plane crash. She was 28. With Joe Jr.'s death, his father's political dreams fell to John Fitzgerald. Once in the White House, he and Jackie had a son, Patrick, who was born prematurely and died in the summer of 1963. Patrick is buried near his parents in Arlington National Cemetery with a sister who was stillborn and never named. The family's personal tragedy soon altered America's political landscape. On November 22, 1963, the nation's 35th president was assassinated in Dallas.
The president died
approximately 25 minutes
after
the attack took place.
John Fitzgerald Kennedy was 46 years old. The Kennedy political mantle soon fell on Bobby's shoulders.
My thanks to all of you, and now it's on to Chicago, and let's win there. Thank you.
Campaigning for the presidency in 1968 with Ethel at his side, Bobby was assassinated in Los Angeles. He was 42 years old. And there was more adversity. Ted Kennedy Jr.'s leg was amputated in 1973 because of cancer. This time, however, adversity overcome. By the 1980s, a new generation of Kennedys was dealing with its own pain. In 1984, Bobby and Ethel Kennedy's son, David, died of a drug overdose in a hotel near the Kennedys' vacation home in Palm Beach, Florida. In 1997, another of their sons, Michael, died during a New Year's Eve skiing accident in Aspen, Colorado. He was 39. And now this, in the waters off Martha's Vineyard, the latest ordeal for a family that has endured so many of them over the years.
That's Nightly News for this Saturday night. I'm Tom Brokaw, and I'll see you tonight at 8 for special coverage. Remember MSNBC.